Hey guys, welcome back for another video. Today we're going to be chatting about Battlefield 6 Beta Weekend 1. But before we do that, I just wanted to thank everyone for the support so far. If you are enjoying the videos, please hit that like button, it really helps a lot. And if you are new, hit the subscribe button as there will be more videos coming in the future. Remember to put your thoughts in the comments below, discussing the topic of the video, any kind of opinions that you might have about the beta this last weekend, as keeping the conversation going after the video is a good thing. This previous weekend, the Battlefield Open Beta kicked off. There were 2 days where there was the closed beta, which was from the 7th and the 8th, whereas the open beta was the 9th and the 10th. We do have weekend 2 coming up this week, starting tomorrow actually, Thursday to Sunday, which will be the 14th to the 17th. So just remember, you can jump online this weekend and play the game for free, which I would highly suggest. So far through the beta on the first weekend, I think the most important thing is the game has actually been very fun and has felt very much like the core gameplay loop of Battlefield. The immersiveness with the sound design, as well as the graphics, the feel of the guns, all that kind of thing. And I've been very impressed with the game so far. That being said, there are obviously some issues which I'm sure DICE will address. During the beta, the concurrent players were so high. We had about 570 to 580,000 players just on Steam alone playing the game this weekend, not including Xbox and PS5. That's a huge achievement for Battlefield. To me, it feels like Battlefield is going back to its core roots, which is the Battlefield 3 and 4 era people enjoyed the most back in the day. So it's really nice to see Battlefield kind of going back to its original roots in terms of the map styles, the infantry gameplay, the destruction, and the vehicles. The sound design and graphics are super immersive, and the visual effects team has done a fantastic job with the volumetric looking smoke and dust in the game, as well as the explosions. And the game honestly is just super cinematic to play, which is very appealing in my opinion. While playing, the movement system felt pretty good and responsive. It felt like the character had a good amount of weight to it, as well as the gun sway when you're kind of moving around and, you know, controlling the recoil felt kind of Battlefield 4-esque for sure. They do have the slide mechanic as well as a reverse prone mechanic, which I thought was pretty cool. Especially once you get revived, you can actually just lay on the ground and start shooting immediately, which I think was super awesome. And the slide mechanic doesn't actually feel too arcadey either. Feels relatively realistic, aside from the fact you can keep sliding within like a second or two of sprinting. Obviously, as a real soldier, you'd get insanely tired doing that, but nonetheless, it's a game. I think one thing to notice through the beta was the bullet registration seems like it's missing sometimes. However, it's actually because of the bloom system that DICE has in the game, where there's a form of randomness to where your bullets will actually place, especially in longer distances. Close range, you don't notice it too much, but kind of mid to long range, you'll notice if you're trying to shoot fully automatic, the bullets don't go exactly where your cursor or your red dot or whichever sight you're using is, and there'll be a form of spread with your shots. I think this is a decent mechanic for the game. Kind of moves away from the arcade style of the game and leans more into a form of realism, especially if you're, you know, going fully automatic and trying to control recoil of a gun. There's been a lot of debate around the class systems in terms of, you know, which classes can use which weapons, whether they should create an open class system where any class can use any weapon. And I feel like the open class obviously has some positives to it for sure, in terms of taking, like, you know, an LMG as an engineer is quite handy, or an assault rifle, that sort of thing. However, it kind of moves away from the identity of the classes originally in Battlefield, which I think a lot of people quite enjoy. Another thing that it kind of leads to is, especially with the assault class, I found during the open beta, was people could have two main weapons. So they could essentially run a sniper and a assault rifle kit with the assault class, and when that kind of happens, the recon loses its identity, especially the fact that the recon respawn beacon is going to be moving to the assault class. Kind of leaves the recon without any form of reason to play it for the most part. The assault class also had the shotgun, which was a major issue in this last beta weekend, and it essentially was just one-shotting people at fairly long distances, especially with these slug rounds. DICE obviously does know about this, and they have said that they are going to be do balancing changes. However, those balancing changes are not going to happen for the beta weekend 2 coming up here, because they're going to be using the same build of the game as the first weekend. I think most of the weapons were pretty balanced for the most part, especially the automatic weapons. There's definitely some tweaks here and there, I think, in terms of recoil or bullet damage for some of them. However, I did feel like when you used a new weapon with no attachments, it was quite a raw feeling, and you noticed kind of how bad the gun was without the attachments. And then, you know, once you play it a little bit here and there, you managed to put a couple of attachments on, and you could noticeably feel how the gun control actually improved, and this kind of just allowed you to feel that sort of sense of progression of grinding attachments on the gun to get benefit, which I think is really good. During the beta, we only had a couple guns, I think about 14, and in the real game, when they launch, they're actually going to have about 40 or more. There has been some leak footage kind of going around of all the weapons, and it's quite awesome to see that they're going to have a lot of different weapons like the MDR, the SVDS, different LMGs like the M60, as well as a bunch of different assault rifles, SMGs. They're going to have P90 in there. Like, it looks pretty awesome as to the diversity of the weapons that they're actually going to have, as well as, you know, attachments for all of them, and hopefully some new attachments or more attachments for some of the existing and to be implemented guns as well. The attachment system, I feel, works really well with their sort of 100-point cap system. If an attachment is overperforming or underperforming, it should be easy enough to just adjust the points instead of what it's actually doing. And that'll just allow DICE to get a little bit more control over, you know, which combinations of attachments you would be able to do on a weapon. I think this is a really good approach to the attachment system. In terms of the HUD system, I feel like it definitely has gone back to the Battlefield 3 and 4 era as well. I like the colors that they use, and, you know, the personal HUD system I feel like has a lot of good personal information that is being relayed to you as the player, especially through the 3D minimap. I think it's worked really well and is very visually appealing and pretty immersive as well. In terms of the marker system, Battlefield's always had this marker system where you can hover over, you know, like a bush or a ridge or near some rocks, and, you know, if there's an enemy there, you do get a little red marker coming up that'll kind of notify you that there's an enemy there. Sometimes these will pop up from snipers spotting other players too, so even if you're not aiming in a specific location, you'll definitely get a marker that'll show up notifying you that there's an enemy there. This is obviously super helpful, especially for like newer players and trying to see the enemies against the backdrop, which in a high fidelity visual game, it can be quite hard to actually see players. However, personally, I feel like just kind of turning off the see enemy marker in these settings on like a private server or a personal server would probably be more along the lines of what I would like, because then you're not just being shown out of the blue when you're trying to, you know, as a sniper, find some spot that's kind of sneaky and get a couple picks on people before the enemy team actually discovers where you are. So it's a little bit hard to, be very effective with a flanking maneuver or finding a good location to attack from without the enemy being notified really easily. So I feel like turning this off would probably be more beneficial. But hopefully they have that option if they have some servers out that people can host or pay to host. I spent a decent amount of time in the vehicles this weekend, and I really enjoyed the tank mechanics and the way they felt when I was playing them. Sometimes when reversing, the controls felt like they kind of switched a little bit, which I'm guessing is kind of how a tank works, but it did feel a little bit kind of jarring when you want to reverse and you would use the correct key to reverse in a certain direction, and it just didn't do that. So something to kind of get used to, I think. But overall, the turning speed and the aiming sensitivity, I'm still trying to kind of find a sweet spot for it. I think I found a good spot for when I'm in the sort of first person view of the tank. I feel like the state of the vehicle toughness versus the infantry is in actually a good spot. There's nothing worse than getting into a vehicle and it just blows up immediately because it's too weak. That being said, there are a lot of infantry units on the battlefield, and there are a lot of engineers around too. So each engineer has 4 RPGs as well as the mines. You have recon who have the C4. So I think for the vehicles to be in a strong position is a good thing. And as infantry, coordinating to take out a vehicle is, a key thing to be doing in this type of game. So if people do that, then a vehicle essentially will stand no chance to some degree. So I feel like they definitely shouldn't make vehicles weaker, and they should just leave the balance for a while, because I do feel like it's in a pretty good spot. The vehicles have these repair and replenish areas around the map, which is pretty cool. And something to note with this is your vehicle's health has little arrows underneath it, and those arrows, if your health drops below those arrows, you will not be able to repair above those arrows through the automated repair system. You will need to actually go to a repair station or have an engineer actually repair the vehicle up to the higher version of the health. So just keep that in mind if you don't have any engineers or stations around, as you don't want to get into a situation where your vehicle's only repairing to a quarter of its health. The other thing to kind of keep an eye out on is actually your ammunition in the vehicle too. I had a couple games where I actually ran out of ammo and had to go to one of those replenish repair stations to actually get a whole bunch more ammo. In terms of the aerial vehicles, I didn't really spend too much time in the jet or the helicopter. The limited amount of time that I did spend in them, I feel like the jet does feel pretty close to like 2042, fairly maneuverable. And the one that we played briefly was more of a air-to-ground jet. There was a lot of infantry and AAs and stuff obviously trying to shoot you down, so you have to be a pretty good pilot to really get a good sense of what's going on with that. But I'd suggest watching someone like Silk. He's very kind of knowledgeable on the jet system, or even Jack Frags on the helicopter. He released a pretty cool video recently of that. When I did jump into the helicopter, I did feel like the weight of it was kind of floaty. It definitely needs some work in terms of how it's maneuvering and what it feels like, but the weapon system on it was pretty awesome. There was an air-to-ground missile, which essentially like mortars and kind of lobs up, so it can actually go over any sort of like obstacles between you and a target to some degree, like hitting a rooftop or a mountaintop or something like that. It would actually like go over, which is pretty awesome. For Battlefield to host a beta without a much larger scale map, I think it's quite strange. I don't know whether they are just trying to cater to more of the Call of Duty style player with the close combat and infantry, or if they're just kind of saving it for launch as, a form of we're back moment. even greater than the beta, but I would have assumed they wanted to at least test one of the much larger maps. If you think about 2042, it had massive dead spaces, open spaces between points of interest, whereas the maps right now that we've tested on the beta so far are obviously a little bit more close range and more dense with, you know, alleyways, and the points of interest aren't too far away from each other. I do feel like the current maps have been designed a lot better, especially with the destruction in mind as well. You can create new channels by blowing up walls to get into different alleyways and that sort of thing to just create a little bit more of a unique experience or gameplay experience during some of the matches that you're in. I do know that in this next weekend, we're going to be playing the Brooklyn map in New York, which should be interesting, but I don't think it's going to be a very large-scale map. So we'll have to see what they do in terms of more maps, because during the launch, they're going to release a bunch more maps than the ones we've obviously been playing in the beta. The last thing I wanted to kind of touch on here so far is the server system. So they've been using the matchmaking queue system, and I know a lot of the community wants the dedicated server system. Personally, I'd like at least the availability to, you know, create or host your own server, but there's been talks about that happening in the Portal system rather than the actual Battlefield 6 system. DICE did release a statement about having access to both, where I think both meaning one will be in, like, server browser will be in Portal, and then just the matchmaking queue will be in Battlefield 6. I feel like with this option, if we don't have dedicated servers, then it's kind of harder to create a community around the game or the server that you play on. And when you do play on a local server a lot, then you kind of get to know the people who keep playing on those servers, and you kind of start to create a little bit more of a community as well. So I feel like the dedicated server system definitely lends well to Battlefield and just kind of how the game works and what people want out of it. Especially that, you know, being in a squad and being able to communicate with your squad members and actually play the objective as a squad is a little bit easier to do when you do play on regular, you know, concurrent servers. So hopefully they do something about this. We do have weekend 2 coming up. There's, like I said, there's going to be a new map, but generally everything will kind of be the same as the previous weekend. There's not going to be too much new going on. Just remember that the weekend 2 also has some exclusive rewards that you can earn. So get stuck in to try and get those. There's a tank skin in there too, which looks pretty sweet. I think overall, super happy with how the game has, you know, been received so far. It seems to be playing more along the lines of the core feeling of Battlefield, which is what people want. I think the most important thing with these games is, you know, remembering that the game is about having fun with your mates. And not getting too kind of focused on some of the nitty-gritty balance, this and that and whatnot. So unless it's obviously a big issue like the shotgun. But it looks like Battlefield has a lot of things in the pipeline. They obviously have the Battle Royale that's going to be coming out using this version of the game. And they're going to try and utilize this game to build out the franchise through maybe even just the Portal system, as well as new maps and new weapons and that sort of thing through Battlefield 6. So remember, get in this weekend. If you are thinking about purchasing the game or you're not sure, go and try it for free. Don't let the opportunity go to waste. These games are pretty expensive, so make sure you test it out for yourself and make that decision. So thanks for watching, guys, and I'll catch you in the next one.